Turning a knife story into a life story. This is a concept that was created by Martin Carey, who's a paramedic for the London Ambulance Service. And on a daily basis, he's coming across knife attacks. And this is his way of putting together a program where we can educate people so that they look more towards their lives rather than the knives. This talk could be given in schools, it could be given in shopping centres, and it could be given by the actual people who have to deal with it on a daily basis, or by actors, or even as a school programme. It begins with a dramatic opening, a flash, an image of blood and the gore and the consequences of an attack, and then also an image of people's lives which had so much promise and then are destroyed. There's an introduction section, and this is normally given by the narrator, who talks about the statistics of knife crime and the impact it has on the economy and the individuals. Then it gives a brief introduction to the Acorn Initiative that Martin's looking at, which is trying to make people think more about how they can grow their lives and achieve their full potential. Then we actually go back into the story itself, and the story starts off in the confrontational story, which has the two people, or the groups of people, where the incident originates. So we see them in a scene, and they talk about that particular circumstances. They talk about why they potentially come armed with a knife, and then they talk through the story about how they ended up in that aggressive situation. They can also reflect on whether it was really worth it based on how things turned out. Then it explains how they got into the knife attack, the actual way of where they thrust it and why, and then looking at the victim side in terms of how they suffered. This is really quite graphical, and the point of this one, it is to give people an idea about why people attack, and also the consequences of how people feel as a result of that. We then move into the emergency services story, and this is really quite an important message, which is from the time the attack has happened and the injuries that have been created by the knife, getting response to the injured party is really important. And what the paramedics will show is they'll have almost like a dripping hourglass, which shows the amount of blood that has gone away as a result of the knife attack and the time limit that has. The paramedic then would tell his story about how he sees it, the problems that he has, what he has to do at the scene to make safe the patient before getting him into hospital, then trying to find the right hospital that is needed, whether it needs local support or even the air ambulance, and also what that is, the consequences of what is not being done. Then we go into the hospital stories. The hospital story is looking at it from the surgeons, the A&E, how they take people in, how they're set up for it, and also the complications that have happened. It then talks about what happens post-operations, the care that needs to be done, and the long-term consequences of that. And again, both the paramedics and the hospital staff and surgeons can give their view on the situations of a knife attack and the horrors that it creates. Then we switch to the victims and attackers' family, friends story, how people are informed what they feel like when they see their loved ones injured, but also looking at what else happens, what revenge happens, what notices happen to give sort of the whole sort of area and the people a rather depressed feel. But it's also, we have to look at the attackers' families and friends and how they may feel about what they have to go through in terms of maintaining a love for the people who could end up in jail. We then switch to the police and legal stories and the descriptions of what's actually in place to detect these types of injuries and what they try to do to stop it, and the barriers that they have in terms of trying to limit the impact that it has on communities and lives, but also the legal process in terms of who's actually going to pay the consequences of a single flash of the knife. and the court's areas in terms of how they sentence. This can then move into the prisoner stories from a prisoner's perspective, what it feels like to be in jail, how long it takes for time to pass, how you actually feel yourself and the people that you mix with, and the fact that that doesn't necessarily mean that your life afterwards will be any better. We then move on to the community stories. And this just looks at about the damage of a knife attack or knife attacks to the whole community, those people that it has affected and crushed and prevented their growth and achieving their potential. It then moves to the community to see the effect of individuals and groups and looks at how that can go into an escalation and take down more people's lives. And finally, it looks at the overall cost of a knife attack, from the hospitals to the police to the ambulance service to the long-term care to the justice system. The narrator then returns to the stage with all the people who had taken part in order to show a film which summarises a lot of what's been said. And that's really to put home the points of seeing it, hearing it, and feeling the consequences of a single slash of the knife onto another individual. It concludes by asking, what could we do instead? What would be the alternative story? If you could turn back the clock, if you didn't have slash in the knife, if you confronted the situation in a different way, what would have been the outcomes? And this is really where the Acorn vision story tends to come in. It talks about the fact that we're all born as acorns and some are crushed but some can grow. And if we bury the knife and concentrate on nurturing individuals, we can have people which grow into strong oak trees which make forests or gardens, but it's a thing which can continue to add value to society and to their own lives. And it looks at the question of, well, if we could reinvest that money that we're not spending on the knives, put it back into the community, how can that make people have a better life? So that's the sort of end game that we're trying to do. Or the call to action really is for people to look to the acorn as something that they can put into their pockets instead of a knives. Look at it as something that they can grow to either represent those people who have been killed or injured, but also to signify what they can do going forward. To look at social media and to songs on knives to get the awareness out there, to start changing attitudes. But most importantly, it's about providing a new direction, an alternative to using a knife, so that they can build their lives and get to the place that they want to get to in life. So that is a story of turning a knife story into your life story. The idea and concept created by Martin Carey and produced by his brother